I'd like to start by thanking the Mayhew Foundation for the incredible honor for being here, not just today, but to be on this journey, supporting them in the very best of my ability. It was an honor to be here last year. It's an honor to be here again. I want to thank them for the work they're doing, the work that we see on the day, and the work that we didn't see that made that happen. Can we applaud them and thank the team that made that happen? Thank you. Well, we have some incredible panelists here to my right, but I want to make sure I get everyone's names accurate. It's been great to learn a little more about their work, but I'm just as excited, I hope, as you are, to learn about some really interesting and intriguing best practices that are happening. We've heard some interesting themes today, things like the importance of community efficacy really stood out to me earlier this morning. This idea that individuals need to have self-efficacy, the belief that we can to be able to have resilience, and that they can be supported by everyone from their loved ones to their coworkers, and that part of that process comes from the act of connection and communication. And we've learned the importance of communities surrounding individuals, whether it's in workplaces that we take for granted, our first responders, our firemen, our policemen, our military service members, our journalists, telling the important story. And I think I could go on in reflections for today. But this conversation helps us to bring that together, or at least begin that process, to not just uncovering maybe the scope of the challenge or the beginning of getting clear about that problem, but to thinking about, so what do we do now? And not the 30,000 feet of what could be possible, although we'll get to that a little, but also what we can think about doing this week. Something we can do in our daytimers, put down on paper that is, and really have those stepping stones, that one step at a time. So setting the scene, what I'd like to do is introduce the panelists, also save some time for you all to ask questions, because there's some great expertise going on to my right, and mostly to get out of the way of the conversation as best I can, and to give them that floor. So just wanted to set that tone, that we will have time for your questions towards the end, if that's okay. If you have a burning question, feel free to ask in between. So to my right, we have, not necessarily in this order, we have Dr. Brad Stein, and as you'll see, he's doing some incredible work with RAND's Center for Excellence. It's OPTIC, and I'll let him tell you the full title if I've got it right, but RAND's work and really looking at the opioid crisis. He has an interesting background as a very well-published author with over 150 different peer-reviewed publications, which would be impressive in its own right, but he's also a practicing psychiatrist and has done that real work with real people and really bridging the practice areas of what we now know as implementation or translation science. So he knows about evidence practices, and he also knows about what it's like to bring those to real people. And so we're looking forward to that expertise to be shared with all of us. Dr. Carrie Alford, or excuse me, Miss Carrie Alford, forgive me, I gotta do this. There we go. It's a whole new world. I can't see you, but I can see this now. She is doing some incredible work with policy in Virginia, and I love in her bio, the reference to making Virginia the most veteran-friendly state in the nation, and as a current Virginian, I can appreciate that especially. But really some intriguing practices that she'll be sharing with you as well, specifically linking back to the last conversation we just had about peer support as one piece of that discussion, but also sharing with you some things that we can be thinking about at a state level and a local level from a policy perspective, and not just what to do, but maybe what not to do. So I look forward to kind of going down that rabbit hole, if you will. And then Ms. Stephanie Mullen is working with IAVA and doing some really important work with not only engaging with service members that are transitioning, but also capturing those narratives, learning more about what's really going on, and then taking that information and applying it back into policy recommendations. And this is something that I think is incredibly important, that we not only are listening to the real-time needs of those members, as they transition, which is a very unique challenge in and of itself, but that we're also thinking about how we can make solutions happen and have both the benefit of having people feel as though their stories being heard, but also trying to make change happen. So once again, I see the brilliance of Mary Lowe and the other folks for the Mayhew Foundation, because we've got this incredible perspective, programmatic government, individual, you name it, it's kind of all happening just with these great three people next to me. So with that background and with that context, I wanted to see if I could ask each of you to kind of come into this discussion of what can we be doing now? What can we be thinking about in terms of the future state of what we want to be seeing more or less of at that systems level? Where can we start to head as you see the beginning of those stepping stones occur? So let's see where we go with those answers.
Thank you, and thank you to the Mayhew Foundation. I'm very happy to be here. Again, I work for the Virginia Department of Veterans Services. I'm the Director of Policy and Planning, and just my little disclaimer I give whenever I do public talk, we are not the VA. We love the VA. We partner with them closely. I report to the governor. I am a Commonwealth employee. People get that confused. But, and my mother will be so happy. I'm the only person in my family without a doctorate. So she got really excited there for a second, thinking maybe I was going to get one of those. But in Virginia, and I was so excited that Kathleen mentioned post-traumatic growth, because that is what we are all about in Virginia. We have a service line called the Virginia Veteran and Family Support Service Line. It was actually, the legislation was patroned by my former boss, Senator Puller, who is Chesty Puller's daughter-in-law. And she wanted to help veterans who were having social and behavioral health issues. It was originally called the Wounded Warrior Program. It kept getting confused with the Wounded Warrior Project. We also had a lot of family members and service members who were like, well, I'm not a warrior, so that doesn't apply to me. So we changed the name a few years ago, so a little bit more all-encompassing of who we support. But the goal really is post-traumatic growth. And what they do in approximately 30 offices all around the Commonwealth is they are facilitators, connectors, they are the support person, we call them resource specialists. They walk alongside the veteran, the transitioning service member, or the family member, and connect them. And what they'll do is they'll give them a whole range of options, from VA, inpatient, outpatient, private services with clinicians that we have vetted in the community, other organizations, and then a full complement of alternative therapies. We work with Boulder Crest out in Loudoun County. We work with some really wonderful equine therapy groups, especially in Richmond. And we have really a wonderful, innovative partnership right now with the Eastern Virginia Medical School with art therapy, training medical students at EVMS in art therapy for veterans. So we have the full complement. The veteran chooses off that menu what they want, and then we do not just hand them a phone tree and say, here you go, good luck. The resource specialist then is the one who contacts all of those people and makes all of those connections for the veteran so they don't have to go out and kind of do it on their own, especially if they're dealing with TBI, PTSD, other issues. They might not have the wherewithal to make those phone calls, so our folks do that. So if you're a Virginia resident, that is your tax dollars at work. We are all state employees. And we're very, very proud of that service line. And that was just one of the many initiatives that came through by our Joint Leadership Council. They are a group of, right now, 25 veteran service organizations, including IAVA, who come together 4 times a year to work on policy initiatives for active duty, veteran, Guard, Reserve, and family member, legislative, and budget. They take those initiatives to the governor and the General Assembly. Every year, most or all of them get turned into legislation. This year, 6 of the 7 initiatives became legislation and 3 of them passed. And so they work really hard down in Richmond with the General Assembly advocating before the legislators and the governor for veterans and their families.
Thank you. Can we just applaud for that? Because that's really awesome work, right? It doesn't just happen. There's a lot of work that means a lot. So thank you. Thank you. And then we have Dr. Stein.
Sure. Well, thank you very much, and I'm so glad to be here, and I thank the Mayhew Foundation for sort of having me here and the opportunity to share with you. I am, as you were told, a practicing psychiatrist. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist. I'm currently spending most of my time focusing on the opioid crisis. I direct RAND's Opioid Policy Treatment Information Center of Research Excellence. We're NIH funded, and basically what we're trying to do is understand at sort of a policy level what sort of state approaches seem to be having the most impact, which approaches aren't having the impact that we're hoping for, and really trying to understand some of the unintended consequences of many of the approaches that are being tried. Because it is the most significant and impactful drug crisis our country has ever faced. You know, as I reflect on the day here, we've heard about depression, we've heard about post-traumatic stress disorder, we've heard about suicide, we've heard about opioids. And the one thing that sort of comes home to me is I reflect back on the day, and if I were to sort of focus on one area that I really think we as a country need to sort of come to terms with, is oftentimes we think about these things as, we address them as if it's an acute problem. Someone is in crisis, and we're going to do something to help them then. We need to find them treatment, we need to find supports for them. And I think we are going to sort of be struggling to really get in front of this issue until we really start to think about how do we change how we think about these issues and address them as they really are. These are chronic, these are episodic, and these are relapsing problems for all too many individuals. This isn't something that's going to be a one-time event or a two-time event. This is going to be a challenge that many of them are going to face, and their families are going to face for their lives. And sadly, our healthcare system isn't really designed to address effectively chronic, episodic, relapsing problems. I can talk about some of the ways that, some of the barriers that this causes in what we're trying to do. I can talk about some of the sort of things that we need to confront and how we think about these problems, not thinking about them as siloed problems, but really thinking about them as things that are intertwined. There's an ecosystem. We need to think about how these things sort of interact and affect each other, and how our systems need to sort of be aware that they're co-travelers. Drug abuse and PTSD and suicide are co-travelers, and we need to think about the systems that address them. We have policies that seem to be working. We also have policies that seem to be challenged, and so I think I can speak to, over time, as the conversation continues, where we may need to be looking in the future to address these problems. But if I were to sort of point at one thing that we need to be able to do better, is really rethink how we're thinking about these challenges and stop focusing on acute responses and really think about how we're going to address them chronically on an ongoing basis to provide the individuals suffering with them and their families the support they truly need.
Thank you. Thank you. And we will, I look forward to unpacking that kind of ecosystem approach and thinking about how we all can reflect upon that. So thank you. That's wonderful. And then we have Stephanie. So maybe you can tell a little more about your perspective as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, all. I'm Stephanie Mullen. I'm with Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. Our mission is to connect, unite, and empower the post-9/11 generation of veterans. And so that takes on a lot of different levels, but here in DC, this is where our policy shop is based out of. And my work is really taking our members' experiences, what they're seeing on the ground, the issues that matter most to them, and translating that into policy and legislative recommendations with the policy team here. And so when I reflect back on today, and as we talk about in a perfect world, I think that is a microcosm of a macrocosm that we need to be more invested in. What I mean by that is that we have all of these silos, right? We have academia, we have government, and we have all these nonprofit entities, but what we really need to be doing is working in lockstep on a range of issues. I think mental health and suicide prevention is a perfect showcase of that, but also when we think about women veterans care, access to care in the communities, and how community engagement is happening both at the national level and at the local level. Those are all areas where IAVA is very active, but I think that it's going to lead to a great conversation here.
Thank you. And this idea that we can all be working together, I think, is also something that's definitely a theme that's come up. I'm wondering if I can actually go back to Stephanie. I'll kind of work my way back this way this time. It's like the game shows, you know, they go this way and then they go that way. But anyway, I'm wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit more about some of the members' experiences, any kind of narrative themes or stories that perhaps we need to be really level setting from in this conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we start with transitioning service members, those fresh post 9/11 veterans, if you will, as they're transitioning out, we ask, you know, what are the top 3 challenges that you think you're facing if you're still serving, or that you faced as you transitioned out? And those answers are actually the same. It's difficulty navigating VA benefits, it's a loss of identity and a loss of purpose, and it's health concerns, both mental and physical. And that's an area where all of us touch on. And so ensuring that those veterans and service members, as they're transitioning into veterans, have the support that they need, have the information that they need, will ease that transition process and set post 9/11 veterans up for a successful career moving forward. And if we take a step back from that, we also ask our members about their transition experience. 93% of IAVA members report that they had some challenge transitioning out of the military. A third did not have the ability to manage their finances, and a third report that they still have trouble paying their bills on an average month. Only a third, had a job lined up as they transitioned out of the military. And 20% of those that did not have a job as they transitioned out were unemployed for a year or more. These are all factors that play into the physical and the mental health concerns as we talk about suicide prevention and as we talk about mental health issues, because we talk about mental health and suicide prevention as if they don't touch other areas of life. But when we think about suicide in particular, there's so many different factors that play into that, financial well-being being one of that, employment being one of that, identity and purpose being one of that, and I think our members' experience showcase that in a really unique way.
Thank you. That's quite intriguing. And then maybe picking up from there, maybe could you talk a little bit more about what you're seeing in the center research that you're doing as far as both, you know, maybe riffing off of those themes? Are those similar themes to what you're seeing in the research and in the work you're doing, or additional, excuse me?
Sure. So one of the things, again, if we think about the opioid crisis, but I think this is also true when we think about many of the issues related to post-traumatic stress disorder, and you've heard some of these themes touched on today, is there are issues related to treatment, that lots and lots of people need treatment and just the system isn't there to be able to provide access. And oftentimes what isn't provided, even for people who are getting in, we need to think about ways to improve quality. But there are also ways to try to prevent sort of the opioid use disorder. You heard people talking today about better treatment for pain. So I think all of those things are sort of some of those concrete issues we can get our arms around, right? But one of the things that I think we still need to sort of come to terms with is that for whatever reason, we see higher rates over time of drug problems in this country. Over the last 50 years, before opioids, there were rising rates of overdose. There were increasing rates of suicide. And so I think some of this, as people are coming to terms with it, you heard the term deaths of despair. And for whatever reasons, there are social factors in so many of our communities where individuals are struggling, where they're struggling to get jobs, where there's a loss of sense of hope. Oftentimes people are pointing to many of the rural communities where many of these problems are actually worse, where people are seeing jobs move away, the community infrastructure coming apart, the social connectedness that I think is one of those things that you heard people touch upon that isn't part necessarily of the healthcare system, although it can be with peer support, but underlies what so many individuals need to be able to function over time if they're struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder, if they're struggling with depression. And so I think one of the things that we're starting to see and understand is while we're focusing on sort of some of those proximal things we can do, what can we do to improve access? What can we do to improve quality? I think at the same time, many of us are sort of struggling with some of those more fundamental issues of how do we provide those social supports, that social integration, whether it be with individuals who've undergone some of the same experiences, whether it be with families, whether it be with friends. Some of those social factors in our communities are, I think, things that we are increasingly seeing are sort of contributing in many communities to these issues that at some level we need to, as a society, address. I think the example I've heard people use is by focusing on treatment or focusing on prevention. It's sort of bailing the boat out as the water is coming in. But until we can address some of these other social issues that seem to be underlying what's going on, that water is going to be continuing to be coming in, and we're going to continue to need to bail. And so we need to be able to do both.
Thank you. Thank you. Would you like to keep going with that theme?
Yeah, and just to dovetail what Stephanie said about the IAVA surveys, we in Virginia, we really kind of focus on jobs. We feel like that's kind of one of the major linchpins. If somebody has a job that helps with the transition process, that helps with your mental health, your financial health, marriage, all of these things can kind of become steadier if we can focus on the jobs. So we've now had 2 governors in a row really focus on that. We're very blessed. We have 2 halves of the coin: Virginia Transition Assistance Program, which helps the transitioning service members and veterans. We are on several bases every single week with office hours. USO office at Fort Belvoir, we're at Quantico, Fort Eustis Langley, every single week to help TSMs. But our transition staff actually have access to every single base in Virginia, thanks to our former secretary was a 4-star admiral, so it was hard for people to tell him no. So that was great. We really miss Secretary Harvey. And then we have the V3 program, which is the other half of the coin, which is training employers on military culture, on what military resumes actually mean, and the value of hiring veterans and the best practices for recruiting, hiring, and retaining them. And then we dangle grant money and awards and all kinds of shiny objects at them. And we've had some wonderful, wonderful partnerships. We are now at over 45,000 veteran hires in Virginia since 2013, and still growing every year. Thank you. But the real key is, and we work with IAVA, we work with Blue Star Families, American Legion, you name it, we work with them, we work with other states. Governor McAuliffe, during his term, he was very emphatic to all of the state agencies, although I always joke, I think veterans may have been the only ones who took him seriously. He said, I better not go to the National Governors Association meetings and hear about other good ideas that other states are doing that my people haven't already found out and are replicating and bringing back to Virginia, and vice versa. You better be helping other states with all the award-winning programs you guys are doing so they're replicated in other states. So we've been able to do that. I actually spent 2 years working with the University of Southern California to replicate their military master's in social work program here in Virginia. Governor McAuliffe in his outgoing budget gave money to William & Mary to have a military master's in counseling program. And we're still trying to get the military MSW at George Mason. And we've done some wonderful work with other states. We work with Maryland, Louisiana, California, Florida, Texas, lots of other states on lots of different types of programs because we're all about collaborative engagement in Virginia. And I go to other states and they say, gosh, how did you get all this stuff done? How did you functionally end veteran homelessness? How did you start the medical medics and corpsmen program? And I say, you know what, it's not only in our culture in Virginia, it's literally in our soil. We fought 2 wars here. You might have heard of them, the Revolution and the Civil War. We have 23 major installations in Virginia. All of them are embedded in communities. We have no Fort Hood, we got no Camp Pendleton that are 1,000 miles wide and out in the middle of nowhere. Every single installation is embedded in a community, and they're all small. Most of those service members do not live on bases in Virginia. They live in the communities. Most of our communities have compacts with the base that they sign on an annual basis. The garrison commanders do presentations to the chambers of commerce once a year to keep those good relationships moving. So we really have a culture in Virginia that we try to help other states understand and in their own cultural way be able to replicate. But we are always looking for good ideas. We are always happy to share our good ideas with other people. This is a zero-sum game. We are all here to share.
Thank you. These are obviously great. They show the promise of what can go forward, and I think to the theme that was definitely brought up with all three of my kind of panelists here, this idea that we can't just think we're going to push one section or pull one lever and that's the solution. Even if that was so fortunate as to being able to solve the problem, there's this ecosystem effect that occurs, right? I'm wondering if any of the panelists have any thoughts about, it is difficult that we do live, we all even operate within that ecosystem in our own day-to-day lives, and we see our loved ones and, family members, our coworkers also operating within that ecosystem. When we think about that ecosystem, what kind of solutions come to mind for all of you? Is it the individual? Is it the organization? Is it the policy? What are some, we'll call it, I'm mixing metaphors, get ready, low-hanging fruit that we can be going after? Maybe Stephanie, would you like to start? I see you nodding.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we heard this a lot from Dr. McKinnon, but I'm going to go back to it, and that is embedding mental health care in your primary care. I think that's the lowest hanging fruit there is, ensuring that PCPs know how to identify mental health issues, know how to talk about it with their patients, and that's both within the VA and outside of the VA. But encouraging those conversations, I think, is integral to catching mental health injuries earlier rather than later. I think it was a really great point bringing up the employment situation and how we're integrating employers into the conversation. Continuing on that, I think destigmatizing the conversation around mental health injuries and getting treatment for mental health injuries is a huge issue, and a place where employers can be proactive. So not only are you getting veterans to work, you're giving them that sense of identity and purpose back, but you're also allowing employers to have that conversation and destigmatize going for treatment for mental health injuries, which will make a better employee, which will make a healthier workforce overall. So I think there's a lot of areas where just ensuring that the public is aware of it, has the tools to be able to talk about it, and that there are resources out there to pick up where that conversation leaves off are like the lowest hanging fruits.
Thank you. Would you like to keep going with that?
Sure. Well, you asked about if it needs to be at the individual or the organization or the policy level, and the answer is yes. Right? I think we need to do all of them.
Yep.
But I also think that I want to pick up on the mental health, because I think that's actually a good example of, we need to continue to think about how our systems need to change. And so when we talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, or we talk about the opioid crisis, we're talking about an issue that's affecting millions of Americans, okay? The sad truth is, at least in terms of opioids, only 10% of the individuals who need treatment appear to be getting treatment. And so one of the solutions that you commonly hear, and I think this is a legacy of how we think about it, is we need to build a bigger system so we have a place to send these people to. And I guess I would argue that, I think that that's going to be insufficient. I don't think we will ever be able to build a robust enough specialty system that it's going to be able to really address the magnitude of this public health crisis. But I think we can learn from sort of other things that we've done. And let me tell you about another disorder that in some ways, when I was in training 30 years ago, that people talked about in ways that we now talk about the opioid crisis. And this is another sort of behavioral health disorder that is far too complicated for us to be able to address in primary care. And oftentimes it's involved with many other stressors that an individual has in their life. Individuals sometimes need counseling. They sometimes can be treated with medication, but us primary care providers, we can't do that. We don't have time. And so if we go back 30 years, many of the same, pardon my language, excuses we use for primary care not addressing opioids and other drug problems is exactly the same language that we heard excuses we heard for why primary care physicians wouldn't treat major depression. Okay? 30 years later, 80% of major depression in this country is treated in primary care. I could use another example. HIV. When I was in medical school, you needed to send someone to a specialist for HIV. It couldn't be treated in primary care. It was too complicated. There were all these psychosocial issues. There was all this stigma involved. Today, the majority of individuals with HIV are treated in primary care. It doesn't mean that we don't need specialists. It doesn't mean that we don't need that system for consultation to provide support for individuals who have particularly severe problems, for individuals who are having one of those episodes that it's so severe that we need to stabilize them again. But over time, the way we in this country address public health crises of this magnitude affecting this many people relies upon the foundation of our healthcare system. It doesn't rely upon the specialty system. And so I think I wanted to pick up on that theme, because if there's one area that I think we can move towards, and here I like the idea of learning from other states. There are places that are implementing things that are working in this space. Hub and Spoke in Vermont is an example. And there are other communities that are doing it. You see a number of states starting to implement other programs like that of supporting primary care doctors in treating the opioid crisis. And I would argue that we could do the same thing for post-traumatic stress disorder. Right now, again, it's viewed as something that needs to be handled by specialists. But on a chronic basis, there are so many individuals experiencing that we need to figure out how our healthcare system and the foundation of it, which is primary care, can do that better. So I think this idea of mental health and really learning from other places and bringing it more broadly to our communities is one of those steps that we need to take. And we need to figure out how to change systems and how to put policies in place to facilitate that happening.
So people feel supported, absolutely, and vice versa. Would you like to add on?
Yes, and because I hang out with politicians, I'm going to not answer the question. This is not a low-hanging fruit. This is a big, icy boulder up a mountain. But I'm in the Capitol building, and I'm going to take this opportunity. Hopefully, you've looked all the way through your program for today and seen that in about a month, the Mayhew Foundation is going to have a screening of a documentary called Thank You for Your Service, which is a film I've been attached with for about 3 years now. And one of the major themes of the film is that we need, in the military, in the DoD, which is why it's a boulder up the mountain, a behavioral health core. From the first day of boot camp, we need to teach resiliency and wellness and mental health to everyone. And everyone needs to get checked, just like they go to the dentist and they do their PT, they go get a mental check, and the private goes, and the general goes, and everybody goes. And it is the only thing in the military where there is no accountability. There is no flag officer that's responsible to the SecDef and the president and whose head is going to roll if things don't change. In the military, someone is in charge of paper clips, and no one is in charge of mental health. We need a behavioral health core. If we can solve the problem at the beginning instead of when we're in crisis, and we set up this system to keep resiliency and the long-term mental wellness going from day one, and we give our soldiers, sailors, and airmen and Marines the tools they need, they will have longer, better careers in the military, which will reduce training costs, which will reduce costs to the taxpayer, and they'll have easier transitions back when they finally do leave the military and go back to the civilian communities. So I would strongly encourage you to see Thank You for Your Service, to go through the foundation and watch it with them. If not, it is available on pretty much every platform at this point. And to really get involved and to talk to your communities, talk to your members of Congress about how we really do need systemic change so that we're not treating people when they're at the point of crisis.
Thank you. And I think that's it's so intriguing, and I'm wondering. I want to open this up to the audience in just a minute. It's so much of this is about the upstream drivers. You know, the problem may or may not be what we're seeing almost symptomatically, but actually trying to go upstream and address those drivers. A couple things to weigh in on, if I may, and in terms of just changing hats for a moment and giving you just a little insight into some similar work that I've actually been up to. So changing hats out of facilitation, and just for a couple minutes here. some of the work that I've done really since early 2000, even before that, is in the space of bringing mindfulness and compassion into schools and workplaces. And more recently taught courses with those titles, Compassion in the Workplace, Compassion in the Classroom, at George Mason as special topics courses as an adjunct faculty member. I remember a time in the late 90s and the early 2000s when I was a yoga therapist, actually, and we didn't have a name for our field then. I just worked with cool folks that I got to work with. That I noticed that there was a lot of stress going on in this wonderful Washington, D.C. area. And living in Virginia, my practice basically started to be a lot of people that work in places like this who are now leading our nation in different ways. And I just got to spend an hour or two a week with them and learn what was going on with them. And I became fascinated with this idea, not only the stress demands that they had, the themes of compassion fatigue, for example, that we heard earlier, but also how we are and are not working in ways that are supportive to our mental and physical health. And so I started creating these nudges to these folks where I would tell them these absurd ideas like, you say you feel good in your back after some yoga and some breathing, maybe you could try that at work. And then they would laugh. And then I'd say, well, you're the boss. So if anyone's going to laugh at you, then you can just tell them to join you. And that's really where we started, this health campaign that's really grown since then. And we do have some tools. If you want to reach out to me, I'm happy to share them. They're free public health tools. It's kind of a passion project of mine. We call it the Genius Break Project. But what it's really about is trying to give folks that, whether they're on the receiving end of stress or get ready, those of us who are in this room or maybe listening later who are fighting this good fight, trying to help others with their stress. Because as we definitely saw in the last panel, that's a different kind of coping. It's a little sneakier, and it's that much more imperative that we take care of ourselves so that we can then be of service, and that we're not just talking that talk to them, but that we're walking that walk ourselves. And so that's something that I've been especially intrigued by. Now I research things like, maladaptive perfectionism, which usually gets a good laugh if you stop and think for a moment. Yeah, there it is. Yeah, it always comes down. Compassion fatigue, burnout. And I look at fields like the legal profession, which has actually made an incredible call to action for law firms, because they've created an entire framework challenging law firms to not only bring in tools like mindfulness and well-being promotion, but to raise awareness around things like substance abuse that is very common in the legal profession, normalized when they are getting their law degree, all the way through kind of practices, 5 o'clock happy hours, et cetera. And so I am the first to say that I think lawyers actually suffer a lot from stigma like many other fields, and I respect what they do, and there are many people out there who are really in that profession trying to do the right thing. But that there's these cultural norms around it. So my personal hats off to American Bar Association and some other folks that are working very, very hard on that problem. But what they did, which I thought was brilliant in light of this discussion, is that they asked all the law firms in the country to step forward and sign a pledge that they would have a well-being promotion strategy at their firm. And so there's this framework that folks can lean on, and there's this public declaration that happens. So just by way of offering solutions, that's something that I would insert. The other thing to raise some awareness on, and this is the hard part before I open up the questions from all of you back to the panelists, is some of the research that I do today is not pretty. We know that 1 out of every 2 physicians is burned out in this country. We're facing a major healthcare crisis in workforce retention alone for physicians. Nurses are having challenges too, and I don't mean to be ignoring of the many other kinds of providers out there, but the very people who are providing healthcare are struggling with these work-life balance issues, which is not the right name. All of us in work-life balance research agree it's not the right title because there is no such thing. But how can we find help for the folks that are delivering healthcare? How can we find help for the folks that are examining the law and helping to protect us, both in the legal profession as well as our police, our firefighters, et cetera? Those are having the same issues we just talked about. How can we help our teachers? 1 in 2 teachers burns out in the first 5 years in this country. And one of the reasons why I teach that class at Mason is to do my little piece of the puzzle of raising awareness of our future education students so that they know about that, much like we might equip a first responder before they go into their response. So we do have challenges that we see in the workplace. We do have needs for all the areas mentioned. But I'm wondering, as we open up the conversation now to everyone here, and we all think and reflect upon where we'd like to go next, what are some of the solutions you would like to see, or what are some of the comments or reactions you have to the conversation we've had so far? I know that's an open question, but I really do want to, open the floor. So if anyone would like to begin, let's start that conversation with our audience, please.
I'm going to start with a question because I get to. I have the microphone.
Yes, you
one of
do.
the things I noticed when I was on active duty and I was in charge of plans and programs, I happened to be at the Guard, we had a lot of people coming back after 9/11 or after their deployments, unable to integrate into the regular workforce. And we implemented, at my insistence, a program where at 30, 60, 90 days, they had to go see the chaplain. We didn't have a lot of behavioral health services to offer people, but it was interesting because I followed up with the chaplains about 2 months later, and they said about 30% of the people coming to see them that had to go see them, no choice, end up getting referred to behavioral health services. So one of the themes you talked about, how do we get mental health as part of health, period?
I'll hop in on that one. I think you bring up a great point, especially when it comes to DoD, and that is how important command climate is for these conversations, that your commanding officer has to be invested in the mental health of everyone below, and even everyone above, right? It's a rising tide raises all ships, or whatever that saying goes. And that's to say, the commander has to be invested, has to understand that mental health care is health care, and that sending someone to treatment is going to make his unit stronger, not weaker.
Yeah, if I can jump in real quick, I agree. There's a AFRICOM General Bolduc who recently retired. He's now in New Hampshire. He was really big into mental health checkups and getting all of his guys into peer support or with therapists. And when he retired, the next commander who came in was like, nope, cutting that off. And no surprise, the command unit went right back to their levels of alcoholism, suicide, domestic violence, all that stuff. So it really is, military is top down, as you know. It's got to come from the top and filter down.
And let me take it from the other side, from the healthcare system side, and let me start off with what is not going to work. What is not going to work is telling primary care physicians or doctors, you need to do this on top of everything else you're going to do, and we're not going to change anything. Because they're already incredibly busy and stressed, and adding one more thing won't matter. Also, what won't work long-term is to have someone at the top who says, this is what's important to me, and for the next 6 months, year, 2 years, they do it, and then that person leaves and it goes on. I think what we do know that does work is thinking, how do we change the system in a way that doing the right thing becomes an easier thing to do, right? And then you have the incentives aligned. And if, in terms of depression, there's a collaborative care model. I think the people out of the University of Washington and the Ames Center probably do this better than anyone else. And not only did they figure out how to do it, they've shown that if you, and I've talked to the guy, he's like, we figured out how to do it, and then when the Wall Street Journal showed an article, and no one would come, but then when the Wall Street Journal published an article that, hey, this saves companies money, within a week we had people pounding down our door. So we know how to do it, but we're talking systematic and systems changes. You change the way people think about problems. You don't add one more thing on top. In doing it with just a charismatic leader who says this is important will last as long as that person is there.
Thank you. Great discussion. Any other questions or comments from the audience to continue from there?
Hello, I would like to thank everyone, the panel. It's been, everything that has been touched on today has happened or been discussed in the four walls of my home. I'm a wife of a 28-year veteran in the Marine Corps. And Ms. Alford, for you in particular, all of you, but specifically for you, I have a couple questions or something that is my biggest passion. After 28 years in the Marine Corps and eight years of deployments, the opioid addiction definitely came to my home. And we were very blessed to get in touch with Semper Canine, to whom I believe was here today. And Perkins is going to be our new child, that my husband's service dog. During this process, which was extremely long and lengthy and spanned over years of time, the 18 months with Semper Canine has been phenomenal. What I have found in the research I've done is that the VA, and believe me, I heard you, I know you are not the VA, so I got you. However, the VA does cover for the service dog for anyone that has a visible wound. So if you are an amputee or basically anything visible, they will cover the expenses of that service dog, which is over $30,000, $40,000 of training. We were blessed to be with Semper Canine, so that, again, as you heard earlier, is a free program. However, my husband's wounds are invisible. And because they are invisible, be it the opioids, brain trauma, anything along that line that is not visible, it is not covered under the VA. So one of our biggest researches and things that we found that we want to get out to the local community that we've already started is to raise that awareness and say, you know what, the VA is covering it if you are visibly injured, if you can see that visible scar. But if you can't see it, then they're not covering it. So any information you have or any avenue that you can send to me to help get that started and make it more vocal and get that education out there would be great.
Yeah, so a couple things. One, and I'm looking at my VA colleague who's sitting in the row in front of you. I think if you actually are 100% rated with the VA, it is easier even if the wounds aren't visible.
Exactly.
But that might be a case by case, and you know,
No,
I think
I
you need
agree
to
with
get
you.
hooked up with one of our benefits team members.
It
who
has to
can
be 100%.
pound on that door for you. But
Mm-hmm.
I think depending on your rating, even if it's not visible, that's one thing. But again, you're in the Capitol, so one thing to do is to make appointments and walk the halls with the people who are on the Veteran Affairs committees in the House and Senate, HASC and SASC, and talk to them and say, look, this is what's going on. We need change at the VA. It shouldn't be just based on visible wounds, as you all probably know since you're on the committee. And they'll look at their staffer and the staff.
And you're correct. It
that
can
the
be if it's
research is,
not.
yeah, the research is Iraq and Afghanistan veterans, while many of them do have visible wounds, they are coming back with invisible wounds at a greater rate than any generation serving previously. And
Correct.
this is a regulatory agency thing that needs to change. And again, I can talk to the Virginia delegation about that, but I have very little power.
Okay.
But yeah, it is people reaching out and talking to the people who can actually change the law and influence what the VA does through the appropriations process.
Yeah, definitely so, because 100% rating out of the military is,
It's hard to get.
but that doesn't mean that there's not scars there, and it doesn't
Yes.
mean that there's not a need, and I
Yes.
think that's
And
what the
I will,
outreach.
yeah, I will say, in Virginia, both of our senators care very deeply about veterans. Senator Warner's father-in-law is a Navy veteran, and Senator Kane's son is a Marine Corps current Marine, and Senator Kane is on Armed Services Committee, and so that would be a good place to start. I can connect you to both Warner and Kane's
would be
legislative aides for
fantastic.
military and veteran issues.
Okay, wonderful, thank you.
That's great. Thank you.
The comment you made, ma'am, about I guess the mental health. Somebody talked about putting mental health inside with the actual doctors in the military. And I know from where I stand, so after my deployments, when I came back, it was a get into medical. I think from 2007 to 2015, I went from 30 Percocet to 120 Percocet per month. Then when I said I didn't really need something as strong, they switched me to morphine. Then they switched me back and then asked me if I wanted a fentanyl patch. So as we're going through this together, I do a lot of motivational speaking to other veterans in my community because that's where I feel like I could do the most impact and change. I absolutely admit post-traumatic stress growth. I don't use the word disability, I use post-traumatic stress growth. I also talk to other vets like a need, where we can sit down and discuss, because the opioid epidemic, even after I retired and I went to see the VA and got my 100% rating, I went to the doc, I saw a physician assistant. My wife walked out of the room, she was flabbergasted because she wanted to give me 160 Percocet. And so we struggled with that in our home. And so I just want to thank everything you're doing. And you're right, the biggest nugget, I think, is where do we put mental health with the physical health without overbearing the doctors or overbearing the system where, unfortunately, the doctors in the military, the easiest way to get us out of the room is to give us our Percocet and let us go on our way, because that's the only reason we're there.
Yeah. One thing that we have been working on in Virginia with the opioid crisis is we have a governor's task force working on those issues. We do have a provider care, a PCP system. We have been trying to get the VA, and in particular the 3 VA hospitals in the C-Box here in Virginia, to be part of that and to report in and to get them to stop handing out Percocets and morphine-like M&Ms. And again, I'm gonna point to Dr. Meyer here, who spoke this morning. McGuire VA down in Richmond has been doing some wonderful things with alternative treatments. There are some VA systems who are not the troubled children of the VA system who have been given the leniency. It's one of the reasons we at DVS have been working really hard to connect veterans to alternative therapies and programs. We work really strongly with Headstrong and again, Boulder Crest, and so medicine is sometimes necessary, and that gives you the hump, but we're going to work really hard to connect you to services at McGuire and in Virginia in the communities that are non-pharmacological solutions so that you only need the medicine when it's absolutely necessary.
During the opioids that we dealt with every day, it was Semper Canine that made the change, because if you know anybody that has struggled with opioids, this is a 32-year relationship. So I've known him since he was a boy, and I could feel the withdrawal, but I knew who he was as a person, and I could make my way through it. It was that 4-legged, good-looking German Shepherd up there today that walked into my house, and all of a sudden I'm like, wait a minute, I couldn't do that. He can't read at the very beginning, months and months ago. If you're on the opioids and you recluse back in, like somebody had mentioned earlier on the panel, like a hermit crab, the dogs can't sense you. They can't feel you. So that's where having that connection with the VA, wherever you are, the service dogs, it's huge, because they have a connection more than my husband and I in so many different ways. And to find a way, because just because my husband is 100% disabled and it is covered, I was speaking for all the ones we met that can't get it covered, that don't have a lost limb or an arm or missing anything, but they're suffering just as much, and it's that connection with that animal that gets them up every day. And somehow the $40,000 it takes to train an animal can save so many veterans that are suffering with the opioid addiction. So that's all I wanted to add.
Thank you. Thank you. I know our time is starting to draw nigh. I'm wondering if there's any other comments or shares that we'd
I
like
think
to
we
have.
have time for one more question.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank Mayhew Foundation again for this opportunity, and if I could, I'm going to both encourage folks to keep an eye out on what's also mentioned in the program, which is the movie that's mentioned. I'm on it, both with them and sharing it out. So thank you for that tool. That takes a lot of time. There's a Let's Talk About It campaign that Mayhew is really starting to kind of conceptualize, and the fun part about doing health communication campaign work, which is really most of the time I spend today, is trying to figure that out. It is actually, ironically enough, the campaign is about talking about it, but we're just starting to talk about what the Talk About campaign will be about, if you follow. So in any case, it is important that we talk about it. My researchers from all over, all kinds of different disciplines in the space of well-being. I'm one of the, I'm rare in the sense that most well-being researchers are in the space of, criminal justice, sociology, psychology, et cetera. Great work across the board, wonderful, healthcare for that matter. My work looks at the role that communication plays, both when it's adaptive and how it promotes well-being, and when it's not adaptive, how it doesn't work. What that really drills down to is that we do need to talk about it. And what gets fascinating to me specifically from that lens is something that I hope to kind of leave you with today, and that is that the irony of mental health challenge, okay, not problems, the irony of mental health challenges is that oftentimes, not always, the person who has the problem is the last to know. It is different than stubbing one's toe or breaking one's ankle and knowing, yep, that happened. I know that, that's me. Oftentimes, it's the people around that person, surrounding that person, seeing that person that can see the beginning, and we've definitely heard that theme play out. So we not only need to talk about mental illness and give folks the mechanisms that they need, which I think this panel has given us some great suggestions of where we need to head. It's also important that we know that communication is intervention too. How do we even talk about it? What are we going to say to someone that we are concerned about? And then conversely, get ready, how are we going to receive it when someone expresses that challenge to us? Because just like those of us who are fighting this good fight, we have our challenges too, and that's okay as well. And I really appreciated the last panel especially about the openness they gave, that so many folks are doing advocacy in this space, but they're also being open about their story. The quick kind of narrative I'd like to share with you is in honor of my brother, who's a police officer, who is currently serving at University of Pittsburgh as a police officer. And we found out in the land of brain health, and I'm going to really open that up, we found out over the summer that he had a headache. He was sitting on the streets of Oakland protecting some health medical equipment as part of his duty, because UPMC has this great center. And he said, I really need to get this headache checked out. And so he texted his buddy on call and said, can you watch this equipment for me so I can just run in and try to get this appointment? Totally ignoring the protocols of how we're supposed to get appointments. Come to find out that he accelerated his care. We found out he had a tumor, a stage 4 tumor. He got the care he needed. I have a great ending, happy ending to the story in twofold. Because he got the care he needed, because he fought the good patient journey, because he had support from his coworkers, down to someone covering his shift, he was able to get the care he needed to be able to have the medical solution. But the part of his story that I am so incredibly grateful for is that his chief not only brought him in the day he came back to work, he is still on desk duty while he gets himself back. He's now back at stage 0, which we love, right? But his chief not only invited him in for a conversation and spent an hour talking with him on his first day back on the job and listening, but the day that Eddie wasn't sure how he was going to take care of all of his, this whole journey, insurance, how am I going to have disability, et cetera. And when he called the office, he got a call back 2 minutes later from the chief who said, don't worry, we're here to support you. And they showed up with meals, they took him to his medical appointments, et cetera. So my point in sharing that story is that whether it is being willing to share out your concern for someone else, whether you're there to listen, that communication really is the beginning of where we can heal. And we've got to kind of push past our discomfort, not just from a stigma perspective, but from a compassionate perspective, that we all can be leaning on each other, both sending and receiving. So with that, do we have any other final words from any of my wonderful panelists?
I would just add that with the Let's Talk About It campaign, what a lot of veteran research has shown is that let me know if you need anything is literally the most useless phrase in the world, literally for everybody, but especially for veterans, and that you have to check in on people. Communication is not just talking, it's talking and listening. So you got to talk, text your buddies, maybe text somebody and be like, hey, I'm going through some stuff, how are you doing? So you plant that seed that's okay to talk about it because you're not, just hovering over them. But check in on people. Don't put the onus on them, especially if they're in crisis. They're not going to be calling people saying, hey, I'm in crisis, can you help me? So really, really check in on people and give them space to talk.
Thank you. Can you help me thank our panel for being here today? Thank you.